All right. Hello, everybody coming in from the waiting room. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We're just going to let a few people, pour in, and then we will get started. But a big thank you to all of you guys for joining us today. Give me just a minute and we will get things rolling. Okay. Getting my slides ready. It's lovely to see everybody coming in, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's gorgeous here in Central California where I am. I think it's pretty nice up and down the West Coast, at least for now. It sounds like we've got some rain coming, so it's definitely winter where some of you are, but most of us are West Coast. So thinking everybody's just enjoying this last little bit of nice fall. Hopefully we'll get some good rain tomorrow. I wanted to welcome everybody, say thank you so much for joining us today. Just a few things to get out of the way before we really get going. We are going to be recording this because a lot of people have two jobs, have second jobs, and they're not going to be able to join us today. So they will be watching as a video later. So I just wanted to let you guys know that it will be recorded. The other thing I want to let you know is that we have this wonderful group of panelists. We're going to be trying to cover as much information as possible in a really short amount of time. So we're actually going to hold off on the questions until the last 15 minutes of the workshop. And then if you look in your box, if your Zoom box, you have a Q&A box there. We prefer that you use the Q&A rather than the chat, just because it's a little bit easier to answer questions through there live. So those last 15 minutes are going to be when we do Q&A. And if we don't answer your question during the thing, we've got 2 more of these workshops. So we're just covering the beginning stuff now. So we should be good for getting to your questions. If not today, then later. So without further ado, I am going to get us started. I'm going to be sharing my screen and getting our presentation up and going. All right, so I see you all there. Let me get mine up to present. Okay, so welcome everybody to the West Coast Elderberry Growers' first inaugural workshop. We are really thrilled that you, number 1, know about elderberries. Number 2, you want to learn more about them. And number 3, that you'll take time out of your busy schedule to join us today. This is our schedule for what we're going to be covering today: selecting cultivars, planting, that includes field prep and planting, propagation, and touching on startup costs and further resources. Now, I do want to let you know that, we won't be covering, this is the introduction to growing commercially. There will be opportunity to get even more in depth later on. But we're going to try and cover as much as we can in the space of time that we have. So I'm Katie Reneker. My company is Carmel Berry Company. I'm in Carmel Valley, California. So I'm Central California, near the coast. I started Carmel Berry 5 years ago when my kids were little and coming home from preschool with all kinds of germs, and we were looking for natural health boosters. We learned about elderberries, but of course the ones we could find in the stores all had elderberries coming from Europe. But we learned that it was a native plant that grows here too, so that really piqued our interest, and we just started learning as much as we could about elderberries. I spent time in an organic farming school here in the Salinas Valley. I did a lot of work with the Midwest growers who have a conference every year and who have been incredibly generous with their time and information, learning about elderberries. And it's that spirit of collaboration that really was inspiring to me with Midwest growers. And I want to bring that out here to the West Coast because 5 years ago, I couldn't find a single person who grew elderberries. And now we've got, a lot of you interested in it. And so that's really exciting. I want to use this opportunity to build collaboration with the other people that you're going to meet today on the panelists, who have so much information to give you and who are incredibly generous with their information. I think we really want to hold on to as we build the West Coast elderberry market, that we have this really unique opportunity to value the spirit of cooperation, sharing information, supporting each other, because it's such a young crop out here. But at the same time, I also want to honor the fact that the first tenders, the first harvesters of California and West Coast elderberries were the indigenous people who lived here and who have a lot of experience and information from their cultures as well. And so I think we have this really unique opportunity as we grow a commercial industry to also work together in partnership with the indigenous populations in our regions as well. So I just think we have a really unique format here to build and cooperate and collaborate and support. So that's the idea going forward. Okay, the goals of this workshop: introduce growing elderberries commercially on the West Coast. This is not a hobby growing group, but this is, how can we actually support each other growing it commercially? Foster relationships with each other in this group, and build on a foundation for future education and connection, and one day in person again. So who are we? Who are these West Coast elderberry growers? I've got here on the left, this is Jed Weeb and Louise Lecouf. They are in British Columbia, the southern part of it. They have been growing elderberries and trying all different kinds, very enthusiastically, super generous with their information. We have Kirsten Ziljovic, who is in Oregon. She's also been just diving straight in, learning about all things elderberry, trialing lots of field prep and working with Caerulea, which is the native blue elderberry. We'll be talking quite a bit about that. So she's a wealth of information and super generous with her information. Next, we have Chris Patton. He's from the Midwest Elderberry Co-op and has been working on elderberries for a long time now in the Midwest, growing a very strong elderberry co-op out there that is also working with West Coast growers like myself and up in Washington as well. So down here we have the entire UC researchers team. It's UC SAREP, Sustainable Agricultural Research Education Program. I think that I've got it right. And they've done a lot of research on elderberries in the last couple years, and I've been really determined to grow the research done on the cerulean, which is the blue, the native elderberry to the West Coast. And I'm super grateful that they are diving into this because we really need that information and that research. And then last but not at all least, we have Tim Wilson. He's up in Washington, and he's been doing things with elderberries for a very long time, but just recently we connected, and he has a really interesting model of working with ranchers to partner with ranches and farms that already have elderberry growing on them in the wild. So we're going to be hearing from him too. So we're going to dive right into Chris Patton. If you would unmute yourself. Chris is going to talk about why elderberries and why now. Go for it, Chris.
Well, number one is that it's a huge business in Europe. I don't know, it's probably in the billion plus somewhere. And it's been continuous in Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's both with the berries and with the flowers. It's very well known in Europe. The infrastructure is in place and they make a lot of money, and it's very widely done. So that shows us in the ultimate big picture that this is a good business to be in when it comes to agriculture and perennials. The second thing is, why now? Because we've got 20 years behind us of already trying to push this thing into greater awareness in this country. Thanks to Terry Durham and the University of Missouri for starts beginning around 2000. And I started in partnering with Terry in 2011. And we have now Missouri is, elderberry is the #1 fruit berry in Missouri that's grown there commercially. And that's set an example, and it's getting a lot of other Midwest states in particular interested in doing more. You know, we're finally starting to get maybe a little bit more action from the University of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, et cetera, Illinois. And we've got partnerships developing with things like the Savannah Institute. Many of our growers are regenerative, so we've got deep ties with the regenerative agricultural movement. And at the University of Minnesota, they've got a project called Forever Green, which is the whole concept of having the ground never be bare. So they're working on ground covers for things that like grow between corn and soybeans during the year and year round, so those fields aren't bare. And elderberries are a priority for them. Hasn't been financially yet, but the organization is moving into place. Same with the Savannah Institute. We've got a grant right now from the USDA that we'll start working on here industriously in about another 2 weeks on developing the concept of regional hubs. So we want to do a prototype. I've got a couple of, shall we say, a node of growers in west central Minnesota. We're looking at 100 to 200 acres of commercial production. And we hope to address some of the infrastructure challenges there, aggregation of the product, storage, and processing. And in particular, handling the destemming the berries. The Midwest berry destemming is very slow, even, and we need a continuous flow. The best we can do now is about 300 to 500 pounds an hour, and that's not good enough for larger plantings. Great.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, Chris could talk about elderberries all day as well, especially how.
Well, if you go to the website, the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative website, there's a lot of stuff there. Just find the presentation page on the grower section. The site is divided into 3 sections because there is so much information. But click on grow and then click again into the grower subsite and you'll find a lot of information. You'll hear more from me than maybe you want.
Thanks, Chris. So, you know, actually we, in the handouts that you guys received, there is the link to the Midwest Elderberry Co-op. It is a wealth of information. So we'll talk about that more when we're talking about the online resources. But yeah, the bottom line is that almost all the elderberries are grown in Europe. And there is a huge demand. Chris was telling the panelists before we started that he had to close 400 accounts this year because they just simply did not have enough berries to fill those orders from stores. And I know personally, what, you know, some of my growers have had requests for, you know, tens of thousands of pounds more than they are able to grow every year for the last few years. So the demand is there and it's incredibly strong. Okay, we are turning over to Katie Fury. She was the lead farmer on the UC Syrup elderberry study, which you'll be hearing more about later on in the program. She's going to give us a little historical and contemporary roles of the elderberries. Go for it, Katie.
All right, thanks, other Katie. So I'm going to talk fast because there's a lot to talk about here. Elderberry history. Elderberry is not just a modern superfood herbal medicine trend. There are multiple species throughout the world, and wherever they are, the people there have recognized their usefulness for thousands of years. So the history is vast, but time is short. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the American West here, California in particular, because that's what I know, and a little bit about Europe as well. So here in what's now California, there is a huge diversity among indigenous peoples, like well over 100 culturally distinct groups and languages, and many of them have been working with blue elderberry in various ways since forever. So berries and flowers for food and medicine, and wood for flutes and clapper sticks. And then meanwhile, across the world, the culturally diverse Europeans have also had really similar uses for their native black elderberry for thousands of years. The ancient Greek physician Hippocrates, for example, referred to elder in his writings as a medicine chest plant. And in the slide you can see on the right, that's an illustration from a Hans Christian Andersen story called The Little Elder Mother. And on the left is sort of a basic map of the ancestral territories of indigenous groups here in California. So in Europe through history, elder isn't just useful, but also magical. There are stories of an elder mother who will punish you if you cut wood or berries or flowers from the tree without her consent. Other stories say that elderberry wards off evil and to be wary of fairies dancing in their shade, because if you join, you may emerge 300 years later as a pillar of dust. And in indigenous California, elderberry is also sacred, like all other plants. They're considered sacred and as kin. Plants and people are in this healthy, mutually supportive relationship where people respect and take care of the plants. And in return, the plants provide food, medicine, and materials. And elderberry, for example, would be burned periodically, which results in fresh growth with bigger berries and straighter stems, which makes them more useful for the flutes and things. And in this way, for a really long time, indigenous peoples actually were tending the entire state of California as just the biggest garden ever. And these stewardship relationships are a huge reason why California was so incredibly bountiful when Europeans started arriving. And since then, tragically, genocide, ecocide, land theft, erasure, and etc. have severely wounded these people and their relationships to land, culture, and identity. And Europeans also have largely lost their connection with elderberry. I should say, sorry, European Americans have lost a lot of connection with elderberry along the way. Settlers coming from Europe brought their folklore and culture with them and recognized local elderberry trees. The earliest record of American elderberry production out east was in the late 1700s. And I guess there's an old American saying that goes, all a man needs in life is a wife, an acre, and an elderberry tree. Super catchy. But of course, elderberry and so much more fell to the wayside historically with industrial, agricultural, and medical revolutions. And so now we're all here because elderberry is making a comeback. And at the same time today, indigenous peoples are working really hard to remember and rebuild. And thank you, Katie. And the movements to revitalize their languages, cultures, and identities are more powerful than ever and growing. People are regaining access to land in their ancestral homelands, relearning and educating each other about traditional land stewardship and ceremony, and taking back control basically of their food and their health, and reclaiming their identities. And locally, the Amamutsan Land Trust, the Esalen Tribe, and the Sagorate Land Trust, among others, are doing really amazing work in those realms, and you should check them out. I'll drop those in the chat after I'm done. So here we all are together writing the next chapters of elderberry history. We are talking about commercial production out west, which is brand new, and bringing blue elderberry into the mix, which is awesome because blue elderberry supports native plant communities and biodiversity. It's a locally adapted, nutrient-dense medicinal food that people really want and more of. But beyond that, there's also this cultural and symbolic importance to elderberry that might be extremely relevant and personal for indigenous peoples here today. You know, for anyone, when so much has been lost, what's left becomes just so much more precious. And so I just have a question of how we honor that, because I really believe that elderberry growers and producers here, as Katie mentioned earlier, are in a really special position that asks for some careful thought about how we balance blue elderberry's market potential with other crucial things like cultural value and our need to restore ecosystems. You know, we have unique opportunities to help achieve visions like this one. I'm going to read from the Amamutsan Land Trust because it's really beautiful. Their vision is for a future where our people and all people may once again drink safely from clean and clear flowing waters, hunt from healthy herds of elk and deer, and harvest salmon and abalone from resilient fisheries, Behold and pray to a self-sustaining population of condors and eagles soaring the ridges and valleys. Witness the sky darken with geese rising off of our healthy lakes and wetlands. Rest assured that those who have passed may rest in peace and know their connection to land because they live connected to the land. And Canyon Coyote Woman, who is also awesome from Canyon Consulting LLC, says to do that, we have to come together for some difficult conversations. So we'll be discussing this a little bit more in future webinars, but for now, I just want to put that bug in your ear. And like I said, I'm going to drop some things in the chat in case you're interested. And okay, I'm done. I'll pass it on to the next Katie. Katie, you're muted.
Thank you. Okay, thanks so much, Katie. And yes, just like everything else, we're touching on things briefly as an introduction, and we will get more in depth as we are able to later. Okay, types of elderberries. Let's just get right to it. There's Sambucus nigra, which is the European elderberry. There's Sambucus canadensis, which is the American elderberry, and that is grown. It's native to America, basically east of the Rockies, all the way across the U.S. So not in California, native. Then there's Sambucus caerulea, the native blue elderberry. We're going to be talking about Sambucus canadensis and Sambucus caerulea. That's the American elderberry and the blue elderberry. We're going to be mostly focusing on those with a little bit of information about Nigra as it relates to growing out here. So as you can see, the blue elderberry, when it is ripe, it is actually more of a blue fruit with a white bloom on it. But when you squeeze it, it should, if it's, you know, it's a wild plant, so it has a lot of variation, but it should have that nice dark purple juice inside. So next up, we're going to have another Katie this is Katie Ewell. She is a PhD candidate with UC Davis, and she has done some work studying those three elderberries, the Nigra, the Canadensis, and the Caerulea. So go ahead, Katie. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. So yes, I've been studying the native elderberry for the last 3 years now. And unfortunately, I haven't studied a lot of the European elderberry and the American elderberry, so I'm relying on other scientists. So I'm in food science, so I'm extracting everything from the elderberry and trying to find those specific compounds. And I'm relying on other scientists who have evaluated the elderberries and to see how that compares to our California blue elderberry. So what I'm going to go over is what I found as far as the composition of the blue Caerulea elderberry and how that compares what I've seen the other values for the other elderberries. So I'll start with kind of the basics, the macronutrients of elderberry. Obviously, we have a lot of water in fruit, so most of them have about 80% water. So that doesn't leave much room for other things, but we do have about 14% sugar. So that's mostly glucose and fructose with a little bit of sucrose, but mostly those monosaccharides. And then we have a little bit of organic acids, just like any fruit. So that is mostly citric acid, which is the main acid in citrus fruits. So that's citric acid, and then malic acid, which is also found in a lot of fruits like apples. So those are our main acids. And so that takes up even more of our percentage. So now we're down to quite a little bit amount. So talking about the micronutrients now, elderberry is very well known for the antioxidants, which are really the phenolic compounds, and even more specifically, the anthocyanins. So hopefully those words aren't too scary. I tend to talk about them very lightly because I spend my whole day talking about all these crazy big compounds with big names, but I really want to focus on just a few examples. So on this slide, on the bottom right, we have compound A is our anthocyanidin. So that is the pigment. That is what is giving the berry the purple and the blue and the red hues. It's just like in wine grapes and other things like that. Those are anthocyanins. So European elderberries are very well known for their high amount of anthocyanins. So I definitely want to look at those in our blue elderberry. But our other compound that's on this screen on B, it's further right, that is a different one. So it's not a pigment, it's not red or blue. but it is a very powerful antioxidant. So this is a flavanol, and you can see it's a little bit different from the anthocyanin with all the groups hanging off it. I know it's a lot to look at, but it gives it different properties. So this is a flavanol, specifically quercetin, which is known to be high in elderberries. So these are some of the ones that I've looked really specifically into for the blue elderberry. And now I'll talk about the differences that I've seen. So at the top here in the table, I've collected my data. So that's the farthest left column that has numbers in it. So that's the Caerulea. So that's what I found in my 2 years of harvest and analysis in the blue elderberry. And then I took some of the data from other studies. So 2 for Canadensis and then also Nigra. So I'll preface this by saying that obviously there is so much variation in raw materials like this. This is really just a snapshot, but it starts to help to understand the differences. So I have the pH soluble solids, which we typically think of sugars, titratable acidity, and then the anthocyanins and phenolics. So big picture, looking at all these numbers, is that the pH is a little bit lower. The Canadensis seems to be on the higher side, up, even 4.9, but also 4.2. And that could be an issue with food safety. You like to be under pH 4.6. So the Caerulea seems to be good and maybe a little bit more on the acidic side. The soluble solids, so those sugars, a little bit more on the high side. Maybe that's just the ones I sampled, and the others, subspecies, again, a lot comes down to growing conditions, but we do have that 14% sugars. And then for the titratable acidity, again, that's that citric acid, and it's a little bit different from pH because it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be acidic. It just means that those acids are present. And that is very much in line with the other varieties. The Nigra that I used, the study for that had quite a bit at 1.2 milligrams per 100 grams, which was almost double what I saw in the Caerulea. So ours maybe a little bit less acid. But what I really want to focus on is the anthocyanins and phenolics. So for the anthocyanins, that is, again, what a lot of people go to the European elderberry for. And so that has a pretty high level. So in the far right column under the S. nigra subspecies nigra, that's about 240. And the Canadensis are actually in that same realm, 250, 260. But what I found in our Caerulea berry is quite a bit lower, just under 80. And so that means there's not as many of those pigments. Now, that is a small subset of the phenolic umbrella. So you have phenolics and then lots of different specific ones, including anthocyanins, but also those flavanols that I showed on the previous slide. So when I look at that whole group of phenolic compounds, the blue elderberry is right back up with the other subspecies. So what I am looking at actually in the middle of analyzing is, okay, if we have fewer anthocyanins, we seem to be making it up with non-anthocyanin compounds, so maybe those flavanols. So while we do have this difference between the subspecies, there may be an advantage to these blue elderberries with higher flavanols or phenolic acids. So I'm in the middle of analyzing that. So that was my most important notes, and just want to reiterate that there was a lot of variation from what I've seen, what other people have seen. So it can be hard to make these comparisons, but hopefully with more research that I'm doing, we'll get a better idea of the blue elderberry.
Thank you, Katie. There's so much work to be done in this area, and I'm thrilled that you are taking it on. So thank you very much. Okay, we are going on to American elderberries. Now we're going to take a more in-depth look at American elderberries, the Sambucus canadensis, and then the native Sambucus cerulean, the ones that are native to the West Coast. So first we're going to do American elderberries. I'm going to talk really briefly the challenges of it growing out here on the West Coast. It needs water and fertilizer, and not all places on the West Coast have the water. We're still at the beginning of trialing, and there's some growers have had some issues with fruit set, wondering if it is a pollination issue, if it's a temperature issue. So there's still a lot of work to be done on that. Birds love it. That can be a challenge. And there's just not enough trialed yet on the West Coast. So those are the challenges. The benefits: uniformity of harvest. These are cultivars that have already been studied for 25 years by university scientists. So there's a lot of information that's already known to get desired traits: good juice, high yield, ease of harvest, etc. Another benefit of it is they don't grow very tall. As you can see the picture on the left, that's our field in Greenfield, which is in Salinas Valley. And then this is Louise from Elderberry Grove. So you can see they're not super tall. So those are the benefits. Here to talk more about it is Jed from BC and his farm Elderberry Grove.
Hello. Yeah, so I guess first thing I want to say is I'm growing elderberry up here in BC, Canada, so it could be quite a bit different from many of the people who are tuning in today. I just want you to be aware of that. Our climate is a little bit colder. We have a little bit of a shorter season. So my experience, you know, in addition to my experience, you should definitely consult with some local farmers near you who are growing elderberry to get kind of an idea. So yeah, it's going to be a quick 15 minutes. I'm just going to tell you a brief introduction to growing elderberry. So as far as variety selection, we're in a wide range of zones. Of course, what I'm growing might be different from what works good for you. There seems to be some consensus on a few varieties. It's a little bit difficult right now because there's been so little elderberry grown, or Sambucus canadensis grown on the West Coast, as to what is the best for us. There seems to be some consensus on Bob Gordon, and also with some reservations, Ranch. I mean, Ranch is probably my favorite here, but people have had some fruit set issues. And in addition to that, I really like Adams, Victoria, Kent, York, Coomer, and Berry Hill. But I'm really interested in having a lot of diversity on my farm. So in case there's a bad year for one variety, I could have a good year for another variety. And those ones do well in my short season. So I'm especially interested in those. I would say communicate with each other, find out what people are having success with. Bob Gordon and Ranch seem to be a really good bet unless you're in the far, far north, like further than me. So next slide. So site prep. We strongly recommend eliminating all weeds the year before planting. So that could be intense cultivation or even better cultivation with alternation between cultivation and cover crop. What you can see in this picture on this field that I've planted, I did not do that. I converted a pasture into an elderberry field just by cultivating the rows where I wanted to plant. This probably isn't a good idea unless you're planning on using plastic weed barrier fabrics. Or maybe if you have a field that has no weeds. So what I chose to do in this field is deal with the weeds by what I like to call sheer brute force, lots and lots of labor, providing some jobs, some employment, and using weed suppression fabrics. But we highly recommend, cultivate that field the year before, get it totally ready the fall before, eliminate all weeds. And what's a good site? Elderberries, this Canadensis does like well-drained soil, but it likes a lot of water, right? So if you're not in a wet climate, you're going to be irrigating. But what is a good soil is, well, elderberries prefer a pH between 5.5 and 6.5. And this is possible to grow elderberries outside that pH. I'm actually growing them right now, my initial field, in a pH of almost 8. That presents a lot of challenges in terms of feeding. So if you can possibly choose a site that is within that pH range, or if you can change the pH beforehand, I mean, I love to talk about pH because it's a big problem for me. And hopefully you don't get yourself into that kind of problem. So you want to, if you can, before you start your planting, adjust your phosphorus to 40 to 80 pounds per acre, and your potassium to 110 to 220, and your magnesium to 200 to 250. But I would like to mention, if you can possibly consult with a local agronomist who knows your soils, and who maybe could give you some advice just to confirm that you're doing those additions right. For example, I wanted to adjust my magnesium to within this range, and my local agronomist said, you shouldn't do it all at once in 1 year, 3 additions over 3 years, just so I didn't throw things too out of whack. So that's your goal. That's what you want for nutrients, but you know, you probably have a really amazing local agronomist who can kind of give you some better information on that. And yeah, there's the handout, which I've got here myself that I'm looking at. You're going to find on all these topics that I'm discussing a little bit more detail. So make sure that you take a look at that handout later, or print it out and save it so that you can refer back to it. It's got even better information, or even more, a little bit more detail. So yeah, this is the next slide. And here's a picture of my field this spring. We're going to be putting in drain tile. This is too wet. If you can choose a site that is not wet like this, that's going to be much better. You know, elderberry, it's true, they do like moisture, and they can, Sambucus canadensis can handle a little tiny bit of flooding in spring, but not like this. This is too much. Yeah, so next slide. The spacing. So I chose this picture. Oh, actually that's two mini slides, Katie. Or no, wait. Yeah, one back. Can you go back? Oh, yeah. Okay. So I chose this picture to show how big they can get. These are my two, this is the part of the field where my berries are the biggest. If you, like Katie was saying, in California, they may not grow this big for whatever reason. They can grow quite massive for us. So I really prefer planting rows on 12-foot centers. And in this row, you couldn't drive through with a tractor, not even a tiny tractor. You can't get in there hardly to harvest. Well, you can get in there with a wheelbarrow, right? So some people are doing 10-foot spacing, and I've heard of 8-foot spacing, but I absolutely love my 12-foot spacing. And for me, I can't go any smaller than 12-foot spacing. That's going to kind of depend on your soil fertility. You know, they'll really take off to sort of a more massive size in certain conditions. And as you have observed, I have a ton of water. So that next slide there with the with my dog, I have been using 2-foot spacing, and it's widely recommended to use 2-foot spacing, especially if you're starting planting with cuttings. You know, some growers are having really good success with 4-foot spacing, or even 18-inch spacing. I did 18-inch spacing this spring on a planting. I'm starting to think maybe that was a little silly. Maybe that's a little too tight. But you know what? If cuttings are cheap, then plant them close together. What I wanted to say about that was, if land is cheap and cuttings are costly, you might space them out a bit more, do the 4-foot spacing. And if cuttings are, and land is expensive, then you can just pack them in and put them close together. The reason is they're going to form a hedge eventually, except maybe if you're using landscape fabrics like me, where they're only going to grow up where you've cut your little 3-inch hole, then you're really controlling the spacing that way. And for me, I wanted to form a hedge. So then I put my little 3-inch holes quite close together, and I did the 18-inch spacing, and then it will form a hedge that way. Is a hedge even necessary? We don't know for sure. You know, there are some people who are doing, you know, wider spacing and having a little bit of airflow between the bushes. We don't know for sure if a hedge is the greatest way, but it's working really well for growers in the Midwest. So I like it. I promote using a hedge. Yeah, okay, next slide. I think that, again, you went one ahead of me, Katie.
Sorry, I think some of them got uploaded out of order. Is that better?
Yeah, perfect. So mulch made from biological materials blocks light and prevents weed seeds from germinating. That's what it does. That's what it does best. So, I mean, it's an absolutely fabulous choice. It's my primary first choice. It will eventually decompose and contribute to the soil nutrient management plan. In short term, there can be some issues with nitrogen sequestration. So you got to be a little bit careful about that. Be aware that you're getting nitrogen to those plants, and the mulch could sort of sop it up as a sponge. you could avoid this by applying the nitrogen to the edge of the mulch. And yeah, let's go to the next slide quickly. Hardwood chips are, most people would say is the best choice, but use what's available. I'm using softwood chips, or literally any chips that they bring me. I take what I can get, and I'm having pretty good success with it. In Kirsten's area in Oregon, there's a lot of mint straw available. That sounds like a fabulous material. So people are using that. And I think that's brilliant. I've heard even in the South, people are using pecan shells, which probably works really well too. Something Katie has suggested, which I think would be really great to try. If you live where straw is cheap, you can roll out a whole round bale down your row, and it'll just lay that mulch for you. Or if, as you can see in the picture here, we have access to small square bales, and you can just lay the flakes out, one on each side. And there are some reports out there of people finding that it encourages rodents. The main problem that I have with rodents is that it attracts my dog, and then my dog flings the straw everywhere. So something to experiment with. It's a nice material if you don't have rodent problems. Okay, next. So elderberries grow really easy from cuttings. It's absolutely amazing how easily they grow from cuttings. So depending on what variety you're growing, perhaps if you're growing truly, you will need to get potted plants or start with potted plants. But we're talking about the Sambucus canadensis. And so you might purchase those rooted or bare root or in a pot. But if given proper care, the success rate of cuttings is super high, and basically you'll have your established field an equal amount of time to whether you use pots. So cuttings are pretty amazing. You could take some cuttings and give them a head start in a greenhouse, but it's really tricky to get the timing right to make it actually worth your while. So I just strongly encourage everybody, just take cuttings, plant them directly into the final location, and it works so well. Next. So I wanted to tell you about what a perfect cutting should look like. Maybe you're going to be ordering cuttings, or perhaps you're going to have a chance to make your own. So I say that a cutting should be within the size range of an adult's finger. So I would say somewhere between the thumb of a large man and the pinky of a small man or woman. Somewhere gives you a good guide. And you need 2 nodes. That's the minimum and most common size, but maybe 3 works. So here's an elderberry stick. If you look closely, right there is a node. A little further down there, where is it? There's another node. So your cutting is going to be cut 1 inch or 2 below the bottom node and 1 inch or 2 above the top node. And then that's it. You've got an elderberry cutting. So hopefully if you buy elderberry cuttings, they're going to look like this. And if you make elderberry cuttings, I just showed you how. So I cut the bottom side. Most people cut the bottom side down, so it's angled, so that reminds you which side goes down. So purchase from a licensed nursery. If you're in the States, we don't have such a system in Canada, or someone you trust and you're not going to get diseases. And there's a really good list in the handout of nurseries that the growers in this presentation have worked with or have used, and we've had good success with. Let's go to the next one. So you're going to plant it angled side down, and make sure at least 1 node. Like I said, it's probably going to have 2 nodes, but it could have 3. So make sure at least 1 node is 2 inches or more below the surface. I like to ensure the cutting is 2/3 buried. Now, this is my own theory, and that works really great for me. So I put my cutting in, if possible. I bury it 2/3. For whatever reason, that works really well in Canada. But definitely make sure this bottom cutting is at least 2 inches buried. And I would suggest, you're probably going to be using drip irrigation, plant that cutting right beside the emitter so it gets lots of water and good access to water. Next slide. So real quick, let's talk startup costs. Irrigation land and labor costs will vary. Sambucus canadensis needs 1 to 2 inches of water per week, and you kind of calculate that by how big their drip line is from their leaves. It needs more and more water as the bush gets bigger. I have estimated buying city water here in my town in Canada, which I might have to do on one of my next plantings on a leased field, would cost roughly $2.30 US dollars per 1,000 gallons, and it would cost under $760 per year per acre. I'm assuming that I'll only be putting 1 inch of water on. We have found that planting takes us 241 hours per acre to plant. Now, we did it in that was this last year, and we did it in kind of an inefficient way where we did a lot of hand weeding right before planting. If you prepare your field the fall before, it's going to be hopefully a lot less. We put in 400 hours of labor the first year, lots of hand weeding. Yeah, you could reduce the hours by planting into a weed-free field that had cover crops the year before. We hand-picked a lot of grass roots. And I wanted to say that based on the enterprise model that we have been looking at, we're about to talk about that on the next slide. We estimate that our investment for the first 2 years of establishment is roughly $16,000 US. And that's based on a small planting. That's a 1.3 acre planting. The bigger you are, the more efficient it will be. And we also pay a living wage as opposed to minimum wage. So it's costing us, that makes our price a little bit higher. And let's see, I think, is this the last slide, the financial modeling? No, second last slide. There are listed in the handout some financial modeling tools, one from the University of Missouri, one from Vermont, and they're amazing. I highly recommend you use them. We love them. It helps us so much with our financial decisions. And really quickly, on to the last slide, my last 30 seconds, the financial returns on elderberries. So the current selling prices through Midwest Elderberry Co-op is $4.50 to, wait, what am I saying? Currently $4.50 to $6 US for organic and $3 to $4 for conventionally grown. And your 2 to 3 harvest, we are saying we've experienced 750 to 2,500 pounds. That seems to be kind of common across the board. And by year 4, we would say it seems like most growers are getting at least 2,500 pounds per acre. And that's kind of in the harsh climates like Eastern Canada. And in the Midwest, where their elderberries grow really, really well, 5,000 pounds per acre. And that's a more productive climate. And that's it.
Very impressive. That's a lot of information all at once, Jed. Remember to check your handouts because there is a lot of more detailed notes on that. And we will talk more on financials in the upcoming workshops as well. And again, we don't have numbers for per acre yields in the West Coast yet because there's only a few people actually doing it by the acre yet. So, that's still to be determined about, what's the average yield per acre out here. We just don't know that yet. So Jed, thank you so much. Okay. Now we're going to turn our brains over to Sambucus caerulea. This is the native blue elderberry that is the native plant that grows up and down the West Coast here. It has, kind of slightly yellowish flowers, cream-colored flowers, as opposed to the white ones of the Sambucus canadensis. And the berries are this blue one when they are ripe. Challenges of this: there are no developed cultivars yet. Research is pretty individualized on people's farms so far. That's one reason why we're starting to gather everybody together so that we can share that information and go forward faster. One possible result of this is the green goo. And this is an issue. It is a wild plant. It's going to be different everywhere it grows here. And you can have 2 cerulean trees right next to each other. You pick one fruit, you squeeze it, and it's got this beautiful deep purple juice. You take a berry from the tree right next door, same growing conditions, and you squeeze it, and it's just green goo inside, or green boogers as Kirsten's kids, I think, refer to it. So, it's a wild plant that we still need to study and learn about how to select for good traits. There are some growing guidelines, but we're still kind of at the beginning of that. That's a challenge. And they can grow really tall. They can grow full 20 to 30 foot trees, which, that's a challenge as well. The benefits: it's a native plant here. It already thrives in our ecosystems. It needs a lot less water than Canadensis. The flowers, in my opinion, are far superior to the Canadensis ones for the aroma and the flavor. And the benefit that you know, the studies that Katie Yule is doing, showing that they are comparable with nutritional benefits. So it's not like one is an inferior type. It is comparable to the other ones that are grown commercially already. And there's this opportunity to create this new market out here in a really thoughtful way. And so that's one of the benefits of it. Okay, so we're now going to Kirsten. She is in Oregon in the Willamette Valley, and Kirsten, I turn it over to you.
Yeah. Okay, I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you so much. I am a new elderberry grower. I started growing them in 2019 with trialing Canadensis, the European Nigras, and of course our native Caerulea. And so Jed so beautifully covered Canadensis. I'm going to focus a little bit on what my approach is and some of my recommendations for Caerulea. We don't have, as Katie has already said, we don't really have any recommended or developed tested cultivars for Caerulea. She did make a notation that if you're looking at wild selected varieties to bring in or a wild selected plant to propagate, to be aware that there could be some noticeable differences. We're not sure why one plant can produce this green goo consistently and the other one produces a great, beautiful purple berry. We're not sure yet. So I'm just gonna try to forge ahead with what I know. My recommendation, honestly, as a new West Coast grower for everybody would be to trial a lot, cast a wide net, and then see what works great in your microclimate. I'm in zone 8B in the Willamette Valley, as we said, so a lot grows here really well, but I still find that trialing plants has really given me the most success. So we're gonna talk a little bit about what I've learned about growing Caerulea thus far, and hopefully offer some input. So like we said, there's no developed cultivars for Caerulea, but I do have some recommendations based upon the European style of growing their Nigras, which are trained and pruned in what's called a central leader system, which gives it that beautiful tree shape. And it also helps to make the Nigras a little bit more compact, which is excellent for ease of harvest. And also it's quite appealing if you look at, here, yes, here it is. We look at some of this style of pruning from Silver Hills Elderflower Farm in England. This is how they grow them typically there, unless they are on the outskirts of a forest and they're growing wild. They're typically trained like this in an orchard format in the central leader system. So everything I'm going to give you today is going to be based on that. Just know that I am actually for main production growing Canadensis, and I'm happy to give information on that as well. But my planting recommendations, I guess we should go into that and I should stick with the slides. So for soil test recommendations, I would completely defer to Jed's information. It's completely wholly full of so much good information. So I'm not going to reiterate any of that, but one of the things that I will add, do your test for verticulum wilt, particularly when you ask to send off your soil samples. You need to ask for verticulum wilt, especially if you're looking at a field that's been used extensively for agricultural purposes, and particularly anything in the mint family. And I throw that out there because here on the West Coast, one of the major crops that we produce is, of course, peppermint. And if you have grown it or you know any growers, verticulum wilt is a huge problem. It is a soil-borne pathogen that is easily transferred from field to field on farm equipment, on shoes. I remember riding my horses through fields and I would always have to stay on the outskirts of peppermint because we didn't want any transfer of soil. So if you have had a field that you think historically within the last 100 years has grown peppermint, you need to ask for the verticulum wilt test particularly. It will never go away in the soil for as much as we know about it. It will always stay somewhat in the soil. You can use various new emerging methods to control the pathogen load within the soil, but it pretty much stays in there. And you could find that it could strike your 1 acre, 2 acre, 50 acre crop one day, and suddenly your plants are just dying and you don't know why. It's verticulum wilt. So add for that test in there. Now, when it comes to prep for Caerulea or Canadensis, really, Jed hit on that your planting preparation or soil prep is huge. What I do, because in my area, Washington and Oregon particularly, and I believe some parts of Northern California, peppermint is such a huge crop. I can actually get peppermint mulch by the truckload. And when I mean truckload, I mean garbage truck size truckload. And so it's very inexpensive. It cost me about $100 straight from the farmer. He cuts up his mints, he puts it in this tub, takes it to the distillery. After it's cooked for a couple hours and killed everything in it, and they've distilled off the mint, I get this wonderful mulch that's weed free. And I put that down in about a 12-inch thick layer. After I've mapped out my rows, of course, 12-inch or 12 foot on the center, like Jed talked about, I maintain that recommendation. Lay down about 12 inches of that heavy peppermint mulch, as you can see from the photo here. And I let that kind of digest down, compost down over the next 6 months or so before I even consider planting. And then I top it really heavy with about another 6 inches of wood chips. Softwood, hardwood, doesn't really seem to matter. One of the considerations I do get people that ask is about black walnut, if you can use wood chips from that. There doesn't seem to be any problem with any of the properties of black walnut affecting the growth of Canadensis. They seem to go, or Sambucus in general, they seem to be compatible. I chose to not use landscape fabric, which is, you can see on the lower right-hand slide, because I have a high rodent cycle where I'm at. And I'm working on bringing in raptors to help control that population as much as possible. So I opted not to use that after a short trial period, but that's something to consider if you want to keep the weeds down in your field. For me, it seemed like the mulch is a much better option. So just be open to considering new ways of doing it. I don't have any special amendments that I can recommend other than get your soil test and work with somebody that can give you some direction. One of the things that we do is we try to tell people unfamiliar with elderberry crops that are giving recommendation for soil inputs is think about blackberries, that those are the kind of similar soil and nutritional requirements. I don't really have irrigation set up. I'm unsure if really I'm going to need it in my particular climate. For Canadensis though, I will likely be adding it as soon as I complete my water rights and a new irrigation well. And I'll be actually putting my irrigation up off the ground to make coppicing of my plants a little bit easier. So with Caerulea, however, they are more drought tolerant. And that's the great thing about Caerulea, is that I'm unsure that I'm actually going to need to irrigate mine at all. They work in high desert conditions. They work down here on the valley floor. They seem to be more drought tolerant than other varieties of Sambucus at this point. You can see on that top slide, my field, everything to the left of that initial row is going to be all Canadensis. And then on the right between that row and my road, I'm actually putting in about 2 dozen Caerulea trees that will be trained in the central leader system. And I don't plan to irrigate those. So we'll see how that goes. So probably next slide. So here we go back to the central leading system. Like I said, Katie hit on that these plants natively can grow 20 to 30 feet easily. And we find that naturally they like that central leader form. That's why so often in our area, they're called trees, because they have a tree shape, especially the older that they get. So how do we condense that down? Through aggressive pruning and using a staking system until that central trunk can actually grow strong enough to support the tree. This is a very European way of doing this. And we will be getting more into how we go about doing that. Of course, it's all being researched on this side, but we'll be talking about it in the next workshop in December. Let's see, what is our next slide? Probably, yes, cutting. So we run into some real problems with Caerulea as far as propagation. Propagation is ideal if we can make our own plants, because we can save money as farmers. We can also create an extra revenue stream by selling cuttings and rooted plants and bare roots. So we want to try to figure out the best way to be able to do that and have a consistent plant variety that we can rely on for ideal commercial properties: ease of harvest, compact variety, scent of the flower, ideal berry taste, and things of that consistency. So cuttings, they're great to take, but they are notoriously difficult with Caerulea. Easily done with Sambucus canadensis and with the European Nigras, not so much with our native blue elderberry. So if you say you run out right now and you take a bunch of hardwood cuttings and you're like, why are these not working? It's likely not anything that you're doing. It's just a frustration that we've all felt, but don't despair. We've got new ways that we're working on coming up with this. Some of them would be bare root, taking a rooted plant of a sucker perhaps and selling it that way. Suckers would be a plant that has started to run out from the main plant and has come up, and you can just dig those out with a shovel. That's a great way to get a cloned version of the plant that you've been taking your berries from. You know the berry quality, you know the scent of the flower, you're very pleased with it, and you'd like to duplicate that. And here's how you're going to do it, is through suckers from that. And then seedling, but the problem with suckers is that it can be very labor intensive to get out there with a shovel and try to dig, and you might only get 3 or 4 suckers from each of these very mature plants. And it may not be viable to do that if you're trying to find 1,800 cuttings to fill an acre for your plants. The next step would be propagation through seed planting, which I believe that Katie is going to be talking, or one of the Katies is going to be talking about coming up. But I want to let you know that you can absolutely do it. It's not as fast to get a plant to come up to fruition, and you really don't know about the predictability. What is the fruit quality? What's the flowering or the disease resistant? Are they as drought tolerant as the other plant? There's a lot of unknowns with that. So just to let you know that if you're going to bite off on the Caerulea, which we all love here in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of unknowns, but don't let that scare you. Still work with it, still trial it, because you might have some of these answers that we need to get to make this a viable product. So let's see what the next slide is.
That's actually the end for you, and it'll go on to the seed propagation. So thank you, Kirsten.
Yes. Did we get the planting recommendations on spacing for them?
I think that was in this first one. 18 foot on center. You want to just talk about that briefly?
Yes, I'm so sorry, I missed that. Yeah, spacing, you're going to think you can do them in rows, which are still going to be, recommendation is actually 18 feet on center, because this is a very large plant that's growing. And so 18 foot on center for rows and 12 feet between the plants in rows. So right now with Canadensis, we're looking at anywhere from 2 to 4 feet in between the row. But these ones are going to need a lot more room. They're going to actually need 12 feet between plants in the row. So 18 foot on center and 12 plants in between the row. That's my recommendation.
And that's where you see it really laid out as they have at Silver Hills.
Yes, and they're the ones that gave me that recommendation. So, and we're just going off of what we know with Nigra.
Thank you. I'm going to add, before I go to Katie with the seedlings propagation, I just spoke with a grower in Washington, or in Oregon, just this morning, and I've added it to the notes, so you'll get a little addition to notes when we send out a follow-up email. And he's a nursery in Oregon that has had success with cuttings. It's called Lush Grove Organics Farm, and we'll add those to the notes. But the way that he's done it, the most successfully is actually rooting the cuttings out in the forest rather than in pots. He said in pots is actually his least favorable conditions. So he puts those cuttings that he takes, in the floor of the forest and out of sun, out of wind, so that it's nice and moist. So anyway, we'll get more to that, but you'll get more of that in the follow-up. So that's cuttings. We're going to talk about seeds, because this is a successful rate of propagation is through seedlings. So we're going to bring Katie Fury back to talk about her study on seed propagation. Go ahead, Katie.
Hi. I'd also like to add, just really quick, as one more propagation option. I saw in a hedgerow here in the Davis area, a native blue elderberry whose branch had leaned down and the tip had been buried in the soil and it actually started to root that way, which I think is worth exploring. And I was really excited to see that. But I am in general just a huge fan of working with seeds because I'm a huge proponent of finding that balance between the ecosystem restoration aspect of elderberry with the productive capacity. So seeds, I wouldn't really call it a study. I just did this in my backyard, but I'm going to walk you through the steps that I followed that I had a lot of success with. So I collected fresh berries, nice and ripe. I like to pick blue elderberries actually a bit after they've developed their blue waxy looking bloom, like when the whole cluster of berries, some of them, the bloom starts to fade. So they're nice and shiny and black. So that's when I pick them. That's when I found that they seem to be the ripest and most consistent. So I collected some nice ripe berries, put them in a little cup, covered them with water, and just kind of mushed them up with my fingers. I left them sit on the counter to ferment for about 24 hours like that. And then after that 24 hours had passed, I cleaned the seed essentially by getting a really fine sieve and running water through the sieve with the mash in there and just sort of like grinding the pulp through with my fingers, and then the seed is left behind. You keep rinsing it till it's clean, like you can see on the right there. And then you do what's called cold stratification in the refrigerator. So it's like a fake winter. And how I did that was to take the freshly cleaned seed. I didn't dry them first. They were just cleaned. I spread them over a moist paper towel, which I folded up and put into a Ziploc bag in the refrigerator. And here on the right, you can see a picture. The book Seed Propagation of Native California Plants, you can see the citation below, recommends 60 days of cold stratification for blue elderberry. But that if they start to germinate in the fridge, you have to plant them basically right away or they'll die in the fridge. And so my seeds started to germinate in the fridge actually after about 40 days. In those red circles, you can kind of see what that germination looks like. So basically the seed just kind of starts to open up at the tip, and you can see a little sliver of whitish light green in there. And so at that point, I did sow them, thank you, Katie, into, here's step 6, into a big flat of soil. So I sowed them all together, sprinkled just a little bit of soil on top. And then they started to come up a few days later, and they're really cute. Next slide. And so from that point, you have a really dense bed of seedlings all together in that flat. And so what you do is just gently use a spoon or a butter knife or something and kind of like separate them out and carry them by their leaves or with a little spoon seedling shuttle and move them into individual pots. And I use 3x3 by 8-inch tree pots, nice and deep, because they have really, really vigorous roots that go straight down. Okay, and then after a while, they're ready to plant. And just to give you an idea of my timeline there, so I collected the seed on July 22nd. I put them in the fridge, or 21st, I put them in the fridge on July 22nd. By August 31st, I had seen germination and sowed the plants into soil. And already by September 6th, those seedlings were ready to put into individual pots. So they had done their first little baby seed leaves and then developed at least 2 sets of true leaves when they're ready to go. So they're a little bit stronger, but not too far developed. And then by November 1st, they're all ready to plant. So it was a way faster process than I thought it would be, but it did take some prior planning. So, and then in California here, planting in fall is actually a really good time to plant native plants like elderberry. So it's just in time for a good planting season. That's it.
Thanks, Katie. Awesome. Okay, one note on Sambucus caerulea. If you are in parts of California, that's basically the Central Valley, approximately Shasta County down to Fresno County, you have an endangered species that you need to be aware of. It's the Valley elderberry longhorn beetle. And your ability to prune your elderberry, your native cerulean elderberry trees is very curtailed. So if you are in those regions, why don't you just reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with people that can help you understand, because there are ways to work with it, but you just can't, you know, prune yours the way Kirsten is talking about doing it where you live. So that's just a little public service announcement. Okay, we're going to talk about thinking outside the orchard box, other models for commercial elderberry growing instead of just, you know, an orchard layout that we have seen in the picture so far. So Katie is going to be up again. She was the head farmer for the UC researchers study on growing elderberries in hedgerows. And so she's going to do a super brief version of this study. And if you want more information, I can put you right in touch with the UC Davis people, because they will be able to, you know, get you the full study and describe to you about more about it. And also their website, we'll talk about more about in just a minute, has a lot of information about growing it. So Katie, go for it. We're gonna do the curtailed version of this.
Right, I'm gonna try and go fast. Okay, so we were looking at elderberry in habitat hedgerows as opposed to in orchards, because of that potential that elderberries have for supporting native ecologies. And hedgerows are essentially habitat strips that are planted on the edge of fields and the edge of properties. So you're able to add ecological value to an existing landscape. You can keep your current cash crops and also add these other things. And in the case of elderberry, you can also get berries and flowers as a community resource or as another income stream. And with hedgerows, they're really cool. Standard practice is to irrigate them for 2 or 3 summers and then completely remove irrigation, and they continue to thrive into the future. Blue elderberry is a really common component of hedgerows, and through observation, both in this study and before, we've seen that those big old 20-foot trees do make consistently really copious amounts of flowers and berries without any pruning, soil amendment, or supplemental irrigation, as long as there's enough water in the soil deep down. So what we did in the study, the field trial, was to plant American elderberry cuttings, rooted cuttings, next to blue elderberry seedlings and multi-species hedgerows on 3 different farms. So each farm was managed differently depending on each farmer's preferences, and they had really different results. This is farm number 1, our highest yielding, most vigorously growing farm overall by far. We used a continuous mulch of cardboard and dried out asparagus fern from a nearby asparagus seed operation. We spaced, you can see that back row is all elderberry. They're on 10-foot spacing apart, which, you know, is actually kind of tight. By year 2, they were basically a pretty good hedge. We used a deep rip at 3 feet before disking and rototilling the ground and then mulching, and irrigated weekly for both the first and second growing seasons over the summer. Also on all the farms, we planted using these plastic tree tubes to protect from the really nasty spring winds that we get and rabbits and things. And on this farm, we removed those plastic tubes by July. We planted in May, removed them by July when it started to get hot. Okay, on farm number 2, another multi-species hedgerow. This farmer was more interested in intensive pruning and keeping them tight. They skipped the deep rip at 3 feet, so they just disked and rototilled. They irrigated about half as frequently, about every other week or so, and they also chose to leave those plastic tubes on for the duration of the 2-year project, which was interesting to see. On farm 1 with the tubes off, there was a lot of sprouting that happened from the base of the plant, and I think contributed a lot to their overall bigger yields. And on this farm, the little sprouts would start and then just shrivel in the heat. It was like an oven in there. It gets over 100 pretty regularly around here. But interestingly though, the plants did make more of a vertical habit. They had one more central trunk just sort of naturally, because those basal sprouts just died off. So that makes it more easy to get around the plants actually. And on farm 3 was a much less intensive system. There was no tillage or soil prep to speak of, except for mowing the weeds. and digging planting holes for the plants, which is, you know, a commonly used tactic. It's, you know, to do no-till plantings of native plants is done in restoration projects and it succeeds. But again, it's normally done in the fall when the winter rains help bring the plants in. And here we planted in spring, and this farm had less consistent growth and much lower yield. And I think partly that soil prep had to do with it. Although there were trees that did just as well as on the other farms. So yield, the American elderberry just did not very well. We did have a lot of fruit set problems, and the blue elderberry did great. Again, on farm 1, we had, just in the second growing season, we had about 11 pounds per tree on average. Farm 2 about 2.5, and then farm 3 again, on average, it was really low, although some trees did really well. Okay, can you move on to the next slide? And as far as growth, I mean, so as people mentioned, the American elderberry is much smaller. So in retrospect, these growth measurements aren't necessarily indicative of their health and performance, but visually speaking, the American elderberries were just really stressed out by the time summer starts. You know, the leaves are just cupped, they're yellow, they are blooming, but then the flowers just die and shrivel. And so we did see a lot more height and like diameter of the thickest shoots on the blue elderberry, as well as just, they looked really happy and dark green. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And so we did weekly harvests through both for this growing season, and we found these are the blue elderberry harvest curve, and you can see that it's a really wide harvest window. That is one thing that the selected cultivars of the American elderberry don't have. You know, the American elderberry has a much shorter harvest window from selection. And again, we were harvesting blue elderberry seedlings, so there's variation among the trees. But overall, we're getting fruit all the way from June into September, and some of the trees even into October, with a peak around the 1st of August, which is similar to mature trees without irrigation. And we also looked at cost of labor. This is assuming $15 per hour, and also includes ladder moving, because I was measuring harvest time on mature trees that are really big in existing hedgerows. So this involves moving a ladder and de-stemming at a very, at like basically the entry level of technology, very small scale, hand scale labor amount. So we got about $1.39 per pound on average as far as labor at $15 per hour at this like very labor intensive scale of harvest and de-stemming.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Thank you, Katie. I mean, there's so much more information about that study on the UC Syrup website. We'll have that at the end, but it's also in your website, in your handout about that, you know, so you can explore it more in depth. Okay, Tim, last but not at all least, we've got Tim who's from Washington State, and this is another way of thinking outside the orchard box. You know, it's thinking about how to use a method with working as a partnership with ranchers where there are already elderberry trees growing in hedgerows, wild on ranches. So take it away, Tim.
All righty. Well, start off with just a little bit of my background. I've done a lot with food processing. I was 25 years with the Big Apple processor here in central Washington. We're in an area that has a lot of apple orchards, pear orchards, cherry orchards. The nearest big town is Wenatchee, which is known as the apple capital of the world. So I spent a lot of time in really big fruit processing operations, designing equipment and managing maintenance and operations. That said, been into elderberry since I was a little kid, picking them for my grandma and having her make us elderberry syrup and keeping us healthy when we were kids. And that was in Northern California, up in a little town called Covelo. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it down there, but I grew up there, moved up to Washington here in 1988 and went to work in the fruit industry and learned a lot about what was going on with elderberries here. I actually live in a canyon that was named by the local indigenous people, Olalla Canyon, which means many berries. And our little canyon here is absolutely loaded with wild elderberries. But what I've noticed over the years, back in 2000, we picked quite a few of them for the company I worked for, and we kind of let it go for a while. And then this year we got back into it. Met up through Terry Durham and Chris to get some elderberries off the vines this year and get them going. And one of the things that is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have with picking wild elderberries is getting access onto people's private property. You know, a lot of them have some real concerns about safety or liability or just being intruded upon. So I'm going to break this down to a few steps. I've worked through my company, Spring Green Organics here, but we're going to go over a little bit just on how I contact ranchers and orchardists in the area and landowners to get onto their property to pick wild elderberries. Through that, we're developing some orchardists who have interest in commercially growing. Perhaps we'll continue on with a bit of a co-op here. Chris and I have had some discussions there, but just to kind of simplify things, we're just going to break it down really to 4 steps. Property assessment, identify resources on how to get a hold of people, how to identify the people that own the properties, initial contact with those people, and then developing and maintaining relationships with those ranchers and property owners. So first off, we want to do a property assessment, really, kind of at an arm's length. We want to ensure that the property we're looking at going on to or developing a relationship with is really has good potential for growing elderberries. We don't want to waste our time on properties that don't have good potential, because I'm here to tell you this relationship building takes a lot of time. A lot of these folks are pretty skeptical. I've got some really funny stories about some of the folks that I've approached on stuff. One of the guys that turned out to be one of just the greatest guys in the world, was working in his shop, and the orchard manager sent me into the shop to talk to him, and he wouldn't even look up when I walked in. All he would say is just grumble out, "What do you want? What do you want?" But I got the ice broken with him, and we're great friends now. And he's got a couple thousand acres of orchard and mountain land that has a lot of wild elderberries growing around it, just some monstrous elderberry trees. But that said, spend the time identifying that the property really has good potential for growing elderberries. It needs water. And what we find here, because we have some pretty hot summers in central Washington, is north slopes. It produces a lot bigger berries, a lot more consistent berries. Just in some of the more moist areas, we're on the east side of the Cascades. So it's a lot drier, a lot warmer here than it is over on the west side. So once we've figured that out, that we've gained some experience, we learned where and what to look for in these areas, you'll get to it pretty quick. Once you start looking around, you'll see what the lay of the land looks like, and kind of we find them in a lot of the canyons and the deep draws that have some small streams in them. A lot of times, some of the better berries are located just around people's yards because they get more water there. And so what we want to do, there's some good resources that I use to identify who the folks are, because a lot of these people that have orchards and stuff, they may not live there. They may have an orchard manager or a group of people there that are working on the orchard that really won't give you the time of day. They're not authorized, and the owner has made it clear to them that they're not to allow anybody on their property for any reason. So
I'm going to interrupt you. You've got 1 minute. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, what?
You got 1 minute.
I have 1 minute. Oh boy.
I know.
Well, initial contact resources. I go through the county GIS. I talk to local folks around the orchard. I talk to neighbors, ag associations. I have a great app that I've gotten. It's called Exo Hunt. It's actually for hunters, but it will give you the breakdown of the property lines, and the contact information for the people. Initial contact, like I say, get a hold of a neighbor or a friend that you have in common. Talk to them, take them with you if you can. That helps. Develop relationships. Definitely what I've found is explain to those property owners why you're doing what you're doing. Not so much about what you're doing, but why you're interested in elderberries. Give them some history. It's good to know what the indigenous people did in our areas. People will buy into that. They understand. Most people are pretty aware of the health benefits of elderberries. When you start talking to them, I'm amazed by how much people are aware of the benefits of elderberries. Once you do this and you get in with these people, then you have a chance to develop your long-term relationships, start talking about long-term lease agreements or contracts, or maybe even having them convert part of their orchard over to elderberries, or doing hedgerows around their orchards and their farms where they already have some elderberries, and kind of just developing what's already there and adding in some of the gaps. A lot of times it's just filling in the gaps and doing some pruning and getting engaged with these property owners. And we've had some really good success. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Those are the 4 steps. You just look at the property, make sure it's good, identify the folks. First impressions are really important when you're initial contact with them, and then develop those relationships, and you'll be successful.
Thank you, Tim.
Been good, yeah.
That's a really brief introduction, but we will spend some more time with Tim in upcoming workshops, because of his model of building these relationships and working with landowners that are already there, who already have elderberries, or who are interested in planting some. It's just a really good relationship. And he's even figured out how to get organic certification on that. So we're going to be talking about that more next time. I'm sorry I had to cut your time short, Tim. It's a really fascinating and good partnership model for people who do not own their own land. So thank you, Tim. Okay, we have one person who just joined us, Sonia. She is the head researcher at UC Syrup that we talked about earlier with the Sustainable Agricultural and Research Education. She's going to introduce you to the best resource we have online for growing the Caerulean elderberries. So please go ahead, Sonia.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm going to be really brief, but yeah, the UC Syrup, we do applied research and outreach on all different aspects of sustainability and agriculture, focused on California. And so we had some funding to do this project, and you already heard, I think, from 2 of my colleagues, Katie Fury and Katie Yule, talking about the growing side of it and propagation, as well as the nutritional composition of the berries. So all of this information is gathered together now from our project on this website. And we can go to the next slide. Actually, you'll see the URL there too, URL on the right, where you can find that. And we basically focus on elderberry in hedgerows. Like Katie Fury was saying, that was kind of the real focus, was to see how we can incentivize more hedgerow planting in California by providing a commercial product from hedgerows. So we have that focus, but there's a lot of general information that's probably applicable widely to different situations on growing methods, harvest and post-harvest, the nutritional analysis, as I mentioned, and also marketing. There's a whole section on the results from a market survey that we did in terms of interest of buyers in purchasing California grown elderberry and their interest in blue elderberry. And we also have some interviews with farmers and Native American tribes in California about elderberry and their relationships, longstanding relationships with elderberry. So I think I'll end there, and you can, yes, please do visit the website and feel free to contact me if you have any questions about our project.
Thank you so much, Sonia.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much. We, of course, had more things that we want to talk about than time, as always. I really do want to respect the panelists' time and get to some of these questions. I'm going to just let panelists know, thank you very much. If you need to step off because your kids need you in the background, or you've got to jump onto another meeting, feel free to just say goodbye, and we will meet up again at the next webinar. But I just wanted to turn over to the Q&A. And so I'm gonna start that off. If panelists need to go, we're just gonna go for 5 minutes. If you need to step off, that's fine. So first question up is, what about the wild red elderberry that grows on California coast north of San Francisco? Anybody want to take that one? Kirsten?
Yeah, so the racemosa, which is the red elderberry, it actually grows all over North America. The flavor of it is not ideal for commercial production or for making your elderberry syrups or making anything, even pies. It's not really ideal. It's a very tanniny tasting, very bitter. I don't find it appealing at all. There is some feel within the herbalism community that it is not a first choice for making anything medicinal with, because it's got, they think, higher level of these unfavorable qualities that could not be medicinal. We'll just leave it at that for now. So it is not ideal. I wouldn't use it. It's beautiful in the landscape, but I would look for a blue elderberry or a black elderberry first.
Thank you. Okay. Next question, can these be trimmed back or topped to prevent growing 20 feet or more? I'm thinking that we covered this in cerulean with Kirsten's presentation. If not, then jump back in.
I have something to add to that, if that's okay. So you can trim them back to keep them shorter, but in our study, I saw that really healthy blue elderberry trees will shoot growth at least 10 feet in 1 year. It was amazing. So they can grow a lot really fast in 1 year, but you can trim it back.
Right. Good point. Short might still be 10 feet suckers or branches. Okay. Gopher problems. I think that we covered that as well. Yes, you can have gopher issues. So depending on whether you want to put landscape cloth down or not, because they can burrow under that and really kind of wreak havoc. So yeah, gopher problems do seem to happen, but in our trials, it was never enough. Here in Carmel Valley and Salinas Valley, it's never been enough that it has decimated anything by any means. It's been pretty minimal. Same with rabbits. Deer can be an issue, so you want to make sure you have deer fencing, but birds seem to be the biggest issue in my opinion. So we have a lot of Sambucus nigra Caerulea that is 5 years old and hasn't really been pruned. Can I cut it all the way down and just manage the regrowth? Okay, you have to make sure that you are not within the range of the elderberry longhorn beetle. If you are outside of that range, yes, the ones that we have that we've been working with for the last 5 years, they are so happy when they get trimmed literally back down to trunk and just a few thick branches. And then the next year they will send out, 7 to 10 feet long, very vigorous growth with huge cymes of berries and flowers just that next year for down where we are. Up where Kirsten is, that it takes about another year for that new growth. So it's more like second year growth for them up north. But yeah, you can even mow Caerulea down. We've had that as well, and it will still put up root plants and then have flowers even that same year for us. Okay, what are the best species to grow on the west coast of BC? I'm going to, I think hopefully that was answered a bit by Jed. Jed, do you want to can you answer that quickly, or should we, you wanna?
Yeah, I would say that, sure, you'd probably have really good success rate with various varieties of Sambucus canadensis. I think I have a lot of interest in growing Sambucus nigra, and I think that the west coast of BC might be an amazing place to try that. I'm trying 13 different varieties, something we didn't cover in my presentation, but we don't know yet because no one's doing it, but I would try that species as well. And Sambucus Caerulea grows in your area natively as well. And I mean, I'm all for growing Sambucus Caerulea. I'm growing it here too, trying it out. So it's kind of hard to answer, but I think it's a good climate. Try it out.
Yeah. And, you know, I realized that I got out of my presentation before showing you guys the last slides, which was ways to connect with the people and the panelists and with me. And now it's like closed on my computer. So I'm just going to say this. West Coast elderberry growers. Did I say that right? Okay. West Coast elderberry growers is the Facebook group for West Coast elderberry growers. So you search in Facebook for that. And it is a fabulous resource. Jed and Kirsten are doing an incredible job of keeping up with everybody's questions and sharing information. That's going to be your primary way of connecting people with to ask questions and build resources. And we'll talk more about that next time. There's also another Facebook group called Facebook Growers Connect, which has a wealth of information, including on Canadensis and Nigra as well. It's for the whole US mostly, but there's people from other parts of the world too. So those are the two primary. There's also one called New Elderberry Growers. That's kind of a subset of Elderberry Growers Connect. So that's going to be your primary way of reaching out, and you can find all the panelists in that. That goes to the next question of how can we access the recording? You're going to get another version of the notes that has a little bit of extra stuff that came in last night, and a link to the recording sometime in the next couple of days. And also the reminder of how to find people in this group. Has anyone tried grafting? Yes, grafting has been tried, and Jed is the king of grafting. He can graft anything, and he has not had success with Caerulea. I'm just going to leave it at that because of time. But we can continue that question next time if we want to, because when we're talking about pruning. Okay, has anyone tried, oh, that was a grafting. For those who are using a fabric weed barrier, will you remove it at some point? Anybody know about organic certification in fabric? Jed, can you do that one?
Yeah, my plan is to try a little bit of remove some rows and see how it goes. But I do expect to probably leave it on and maybe change it after it wears out, maybe 10 or 15 years from now. And you can absolutely, yes, you can use fabric weed barriers with organic certification. We're an organic certified farm.
Yeah, plastic, it might not be an issue, but landscape, plastic
yeah,
might be an issue, but
you just have to get confirmation for each specific product that you would like to use from your specific organic certifier, the person or the organization that you're paying fees to before you use such a product. But it should be no problem.
Thank you. Is Paso Robles in a protected area for the beetle? I believe you are too far south, but I'll follow up with you about that. Sorry to get back to the red elder. Is the chemistry of the flower similar or should not be used either? Kirsten, do you know about the flower?
I couldn't get into specific answers about the chemistry of the plant. If it smells fine, that's really great. But generally speaking, just painting with a broad brush, I would not use racemosa, the red elder, for anything other than landscaping purposes at this point until it's been more heavily studied. If you're producing anything that is edible, it's nice to have this research that we already have so far on what we can use to back up whether something is healthy to use or not. As an herbalist, I would use it for a variety of other things if there was nothing else to be used, but there's much better things on the market right now as far as growing that are more viable.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Those are the other questions we have. There are some more in the chat that I'm going to answer individually with emails later, or we will address in the next workshop because I just want to respect everyone's time. Yes, Kirsten.
I noticed something came across about Mexicana, and I just wanted to clarify, and maybe UC Davis can as well add more to this. It is my understanding, looking at the USDA information, Mexicana and Caerulea are actually the same plant. I haven't seen anything that delineates them as being two separate plants. It just kind of it describes where maybe one is found more often than the other. It seems like they refer to Mexicana, which is classified technically as Caerulea, as being found in areas down like in Texas and certain places like that. If there anybody else wants to clarify, my understanding it's the same plant.
Yeah, thank you. And those were the couple of questions in the chat. There's some information in the chat also about the Facebook groups. And thank you. Thank you to all of you for coming and learning about this. And thank you to our panelists. And we will see you. The next workshop is December, I closed my slides. It's December 8th or 9th. Is that Wednesday? Check your email. And then there's one last one in January when we will be covering the information about the next parts of growing and then harvesting and post-harvest. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bye.